Alright guys, welcome to a stream here. I just wanted to do some 3D modeling today. And I've got Jason on, you might know him as J-Rock. Does a few live streams every once in a while. Got him on voice chat here. We keep him company during part of the stream here, so.
Hello everybody.
Alright, so, I've been doing 3D modeling for, gosh, I don't know, 15 years, something like that. 10, 15 years, somewhere around there. And it's been a struggle to learn all this stuff, and just using the internet to teach yourself as much as you can. And I've always said that one of the objects that I enjoyed doing was this building at Watkins Glen, because it taught me the most about vertex modeling and edge modeling and polygon modeling. And I've always said that that particular building, and what I'm talking about is this one here at Victory Lane at Watkins Glen. Making that model, it was probably 7 years ago. It took me almost 1.5 years to make that object, and I don't even know if I ever completely finished it. But that's something that's, I've always said, using all the tools that I've learned since then, I could build that so much better and so much faster. I decided to get back into streaming today and give this a go again, see where I get with it. Not sure if this is going to be used for anything. I'm going to keep NASCAR 2003 in mind as far as poly count and level of detail and stuff like that. Don't know if it's going into the game at all or anything like that, but there's a lot of complex shapes, and Jason kind of touched on in his last stream, or the previous stream before the last or whatever, how to go about finding missing information. There are tons of reference materials for this particular building now, but when they first built it, it's a common occurrence where they will build something, you'll find very little information on it. You kind of got to go by guesswork and maybe 1 or 2 photographs in the early on process, and that's when everybody wants that to be made. So going to touch on how I approach something like that with just this one picture for reference. Now, when I get around to texture work and stuff like that, obviously I'm going to have to find more information. But as far as building the model, this is plenty of information, along with using Google Earth, and this is the top-down view of that same building. So you can see they got Victory Lane right here. Yeah, well, that's something I'll touch on. I realize I don't have chat up here on the screen, so for reference, Jason's saying in the chat, thanks for pointing out his problem stream in this past Saturday. But there are 100 different ways to go about doing the same thing, and what he did was one method, and what I'm going to do is show another method of approaching the same or similar thing. And there is no right or wrong way either. As long as you get to the end result, it really makes no difference. But there are hundreds of tools in Max, and I don't know every one of them. I'll tell you that right now. The way I'm doing this, if you're a professional, had professional training in doing this stuff, you may look at what I'm doing as just, well, that's archaic. Why would you do it that way? So it depends on where your level of skill is, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with having a lower skill or higher skill or whatever. There's nothing wrong with that, as long as you're in there trying and getting something done. There's nothing wrong with that. It's taken a lot of practice to get to the point that I'm going to demonstrate today, so I definitely didn't start out doing it the way I'm doing it now. So having said all that, first step I'm going to show is getting a plane set up. I've talked about it before, grabbing that wheel right there, dragging your mouse out while you're left clicking. And one other thing I'm going to turn on here in a couple minutes is keystrokes, but I'm going to leave that off until I get into Max here. And if I forget to turn that on, please remind me. It is turned off right now. So this is kind of a lower image quality than I'd want to use for this, but it'll work. So I'm just hitting print screen. I'm going to open up a new image here, and it does not need to be that big. So bring that over. And we'll just use this right here. Now we got a little bit bigger, so we have enough information in there. Hopefully all the settings are working as far as the stream goes. So that we'll use that as our ground plane. I'll save that on the desktop, and I'll save it as a bitmap. So that's fine there. Probably could have spent a little bit more time lining everything up perfectly, but the image quality on this thing is pretty poor, so I'm not super worried about it. Alright, so we'll have 3ds Max open. I'm also going to go ahead and switch to orthographic. Mentioned that before. I prefer orthographic only. I know a lot of people use, including Jason, use front, top, left, different viewports. I find it more confusing. There's nothing wrong with that. If it's more convenient for you to understand what's going on in 3D space, there's nothing wrong with that. I also find it's easier to see on stream, and as far as everything goes here, it's easier to show on the video. And as I'm saying that, I'm going to go ahead and turn on the keystroke, and hopefully that's showing up. I believe it is. Looks like it is. So go ahead and draw a plane here. Yeah, seeing it now in stream there. Looks like it is working. Just right clicking on these here to get rid of the extra segments. And I'll go ahead and move that to 000. Just right clicking. Yeah, and I'll just show you if I hit control. Looks like it works pretty well, so. I'm going to go ahead and turn the grid off on this by just hitting G on the keyboard. Realizing I probably don't need to call out as much as I normally would. So, I talked about this in a previous video. Don't know if that ended up being live or not. But until you convert this to editable poly, you can still go in here and change, the length and width. And I can tell just by looking at it that's way too big. To get a rough idea of what that needs to be, I can use the ruler tool and just get a close estimate here. So I can tell I need to change it to meters, obviously. 87 meters. We'll make it 90 by 90 to start with. So just typing in 90 by 90 there. Z to zoom. Zoom in a little bit. Until the grid is much bigger by zooming in that far. So that's kind of the scale of the world that we're going to be working in there. When you zoom way out like that, it is difficult to see what you're doing. You can see, especially at that area, the grid kind of gets a little bit hard to look at, I guess. You can let me know if I should leave that on or turn that off. I usually turn it off, to be honest with you. I know I'm working in 000, so I don't need to worry about it. At this point, I've got the plane. I'm done editing the plane as far as, in that rollout. I'm ready to go ahead and convert it to editable poly, so I'll go ahead and convert it there. At this point, I will go ahead and apply the texture. If I'm working on a object for game use, I will typically reserve this material for the final output. So I'll start working down in this corner and start filling up textures as I'm working. you know, spreading out this way towards that, and then making my final texture over here. Depends on how many elements and how many textures you're going to end up having in the scene, and you may have multiple objects in one scene and that kind of thing, so I don't know if that matters, but just in case it does, I kind of start in this area in 3ds Max and work this way. And then once I isolate the final object, then I'll reassign, you know, the default texture over here at default material 01. I'll reassign that as the final texture. Don't know if that makes any difference, but I haven't had any issues doing it, so go ahead and switch to standard. And we'll put a bitmap in. Yeah, usually leave the grid on. It's not such a bother in this, you know, level of detail, level of zoom, I guess. So go ahead and drag and drop that there, and show shaded material in viewport. Now it's not mapped, so it's going to look weird. Go ahead and unwrap this. Make sure it's visible. I can hit quick planar, and that'll get you pretty close. I think for what we're doing, I'm actually going to, I realize you can't see that, sorry. It's been a little while since I've streamed. The other thing I need to do is turn on angle snap. I'm working with 3 screens, so I typically don't have stuff on, specifically on the center screen. I usually have the stuff off screen, but obviously you guys can't see that, so I've got angle snap on to turn that 90 degrees. This is where knowing coordinate systems helps. So I'm going to go over here to vertex. I know the height, which is V for vertical. Helps you remember that. That's going to be 0, so right click, that moves it up to 0. This is going to be 1, so I can hit 1 there. I know that the far right of the non-repeated texture is going to be 1. Oops, put that on the V. I need to put that on the U. There you go. And right click, and those will move over to that side there. And I've actually got that backwards, so I'm going to do this. Select them all. Still got angle snap on, rotated 180 degrees. Now I've got that laid out the way I want it to. Obviously it's a little bit squished, so the next thing we need to do is go ahead and convert that to editable poly. Let's see. Next thing I need to do is set up a measurement plane. There are measurement tools in this. You can use those. I've gotten in the habit of using planes for measurements. Again, this is where I can draw the plane. I can cancel by right-clicking, drawing the plane, and then I can go over to the modifier list. Until I convert this to something else, I can still edit the length and width right here. So now I'll put, since this is, you know, it has square elements to it, the building, I can go in Google Earth and I can get the measuring tool, and I can measure a certain point from here to, let's say, well, let's measure the main building back here. It does not matter which one you pick. That says 20.02. I'm going to round that down to 20 even. So we'll make the total length 20. And we'll make this roughly half so it's a rectangle so I can tell which way it goes. Angle snap is still on, so I'm going to rotate this up 90 degrees. And then I'm just going to move this over. This is where orthographic view comes in, because if you're in perspective, you can only zoom in so far before it starts getting kind of weird. So make sure I'm on orthographic. And the camera messes up, of course. So I can tell that that's way too wide. So I go back to here and turn snap off just to make sure it doesn't do anything weird. And I need to move the X, so I'm going to just move it back here. Still just a little bit too big. I'm not going to get super precise with this. So the stream is just kind of a guide. It's going to be a little bit more in depth than I want it to be because that's just the way I do things. So we know that it's scaled that direction in the y-axis in this case. We also need to scale it the other direction. So I will take, without moving that side, I'll just grab this endpoint and pull it over here. That is roughly 31.25 is what we'll call that. Oops, wrong one. 31.25, yes. I can use the same plane if I wanted to. I still haven't converted it to anything, so I can make that 31.25. Rotate it 90 degrees. Angle snap on. Rotate the camera. Go ahead and move this over here. Obviously, that's way too big. Oops. Go ahead and just move this over here for now. Make sure I'm scaling the ground plane. Now at this point it does not matter that I'm moving the ground plane because I can just recenter it. Tell that that's just a little bit too big. Yeah, it's a little bit too big. That's pretty good right there. For what we're doing today, this is fine. You may want to spend a little bit more time on it than what I'm doing here. But yeah, that's not bad at all. Jason's asking, what is it that the angle snap accomplishes? Precision, for lack of a better word. Make sure, notice those numbers. It appears right about here on the screen. Hopefully it shows up in the stream, but I've got it set to 5-degree increments. So I can tell exactly where 90 degrees is. I can go 45 degrees this way, and obviously doing weird angles like that isn't the best use of it. You can also change, I think it's right click, yeah, you can change how much angle 5 degrees. So you can change the percentage. You can change it to 2.5, 10, whatever you want to do. So I think all of the snap settings in here, the snap radius. So how big is the circle around if you're snapping a vert? The preview is 30 pixels. The actual snap radius is 20 pixels. So if you got a bunch of verts really close together and you're kind of zoomed out, you can adjust that setting right there and it might help you. Angle percentage, and then snap toggle percentage as well. So all those settings are accessed in there, and that's just by right-clicking on any one of those. Actually, it does bring up a different window. It brings up a different window on angle snap and percent snap. Regular snap brings up a different. And I've actually never seen that menu before, so that's interesting. Yeah, it's right-click to. Right-click on angle snap is where I got to it originally, but I believe it's the same on percent snap. Yeah, but I'll have to look into this menu because I've never actually been in this. Okay, so it's the same menu. It's just different tabs up here. So when I right-click on angle snap, it brings up this tab. When I right-click on snaps, it brings up this tab. So I've never messed with any of this stuff, so I'm on the snaps tab. I'm assuming it's basically another representation of these buttons up here. So at this point we can delete our alignment plane or measuring plane. I've got that laid out as much as I need to. You know, you can check yourself at this point by going back to the standard primitives. Like I say, I prefer using box modeling. I'll go ahead and turn the grid back on. I prefer box modeling than anything else for architecture like this. Spline modeling has its purpose, just like everything else. There's nothing wrong with using splines. You're creating shapes out of nothing, regardless of how you get there. So it just depends on how you want to get there, basically. So like I said, I can check my measurements by doing this here. So I know that's 31.24 and the other one was 20. I can go in here and once again, I can still edit it because I haven't changed it to anything else yet. I can do 30, let's see, is it this one? No, this one. Yes. So I know that measurement was 20. This one was 31.25. That will change, and the reason the reason for that is I'm actually measuring the overhang, so this will end up getting recessed a little bit. We'll talk a little bit about, I'm only going to use this image, so I've got to get all of my overhang information by guessing what that overhang is. It's going to be approximately 8 to 12 inches, let's say. Now, how do I get that number? Common building practices. You can look up measurements for overhangs on, standard construction. Most of that is going to be the same as or similar to house construction, depending on the object, of course, that you're trying to create or recreate. But generally speaking, that's going to be 8 to 12 inches. And it's usually 8 or 12 inches, not anywhere in between. It's usually 8 or 12 inches, just based on what I know about construction. It's amazing how, especially doing architecture modeling like this, how much you use construction knowledge. And the next measurement that I need is height. So it's a little bit hard to tell because this area is actually on a hill and it's actually sitting down. There's actually quite a steep drop off right behind this little fence here. Excuse me. The fence is literally right on the concrete. It's probably 15-20 feet away from the edge of the building, and there's a very steep, down. The building is sunk down below what you're seeing right here. You're not going to be able to tell that from this picture, but that's something to keep in mind, where having more information would be helpful there. But I can also kind of, going by the railings. I've talked about that in other buildings. The standard height of a handrail is going to be 36 inches, which is 0.944 meters or 941 meters or something. I'll have to look it up here in just a second. Said it in other videos, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent on basics, but I always work in meters, setting up all my scales and stuff in meters. I'm not going to go into that in this particular stream or video. But it keeps everything a lot more consistent. The other thing that is standard height is the height of a story, and this is a 3-story tall building with 2 stories usable space. And again, it doesn't look like it because it looks like the bottom is a little bit shorter. But again, I know the building. I've seen it from other angles. I know for a fact that it's actually 3 stories tall, 2 stories square, you know, with a pitched 1-story tall roof. Well, how tall is a story? In standard building practices, it's 10 feet. So if from this white line that goes around halfway on the square part is 10 feet to the edge of this right here, then that's 10 feet. Then up to the, you know, the ridge is also 10 feet. So it's 30 feet tall, basically. So I hope that part comes across as how do I guess at the height of something. Standard building practices. There are image measuring tools that you can use. None that are free, so you'd have to buy it. You could use known measurements like the hand railing. So you put a point there and a point there, tell it that it's 3 feet, and then anywhere else you measure, it will output what it thinks that measurement is based on what it knows. I've done that before on a standard building. I know I'm rambling here, but on a standard building, there's really no reason to do any of that stuff. I know that the likelihood of that building being 30 feet tall from here to the base of the building is 98%. That's what it is. So some of it is guesswork, but it's educated guesswork. So we're going to use 30 feet as the height. At this point, when I'm building this box, I'm going to just be modeling the bottom here. So let me open a web browser and give me just a second here. I think I'm going to go ahead and subtract the roof overhang right now. So it's going to be 12 inches. I know you can't see it. I'll pull it over here in just a second. 12 inches to meters. So that, I'm just typing into Google, 12 inches to meters. This is what it pulls up. It pulls up the calculator. You can change these to whatever you want to equal whatever you want. So I'm going to take that number and I'm going to open up my calculator. Multiply it by 2 because there's 2 overhangs. Hopefully that makes sense. There's an overhang on this end, there's an overhang on the other end. So how do I get the length of the building? In some cases, the earth image will be offset to where you can see some of the wall. I don't like measuring that because it's already misskewed a little bit just by the way the camera is taking the picture. I would rather take the known measurement of the roof, subtract the overhang on both ends. So I need to take the total, which was 31.25. So I'll put this in memory. Minus that number. So that is what the main part of the building is going to be. So I took the total of the roof minus the 2 12-inch overhangs. And that's what the length of the building is. Now I have more decimal points than what's allowed in 3ds Max, so I'm just going to paste it, and you notice it cut off what it can't use or doesn't need. Let's look at the building again. I've got a 12-inch overhang on this side and a 12-inch overhang on that side. So again, I need to do the same thing. So in this case, the reason I put that in memory is I'll take 20, which is the width of the roof. The width of the roof right here. 20 minus, that's, 24 inches. So that is going to be the width. So paste that over here. Now I know that's the width of that main part of that building. The other thing I need to know is, so I go to feet and I go to 20 feet. So that is going to be the height of the main box of the building. Got too many windows open here. So there's the main box of the building right there. Also need to recenter this plane before I forget about it. So I got the plane back to 0, 0, 0. I've got the box. I should end up with this being pretty much 12 inches less than the roof, which, I mean, it's going to be hard to tell. That's pretty darn close. Again, that ground plane is pretty skewed. So I'm just going to align it fairly close to down here. You can kind of see why the ground plane can get into a little bit of trouble, especially if it's not a perfectly straight down view. What you're looking at in 3ds Max is a straight down view, and when you do that on top of a not straight down view, the ground plane will actually get you in trouble. So you're better off using actual measurements than anything else. Alright, so there are a couple things that I need to do. I'm going to go ahead and hide the ground plane, but I'm also going to make life easy and rename a few things just so it's easier to find in the list. And I just moved that, so I'll recenter it. So now I'm going to hide the ground plane. There are a few things off of this that I don't need, so I'm going to go ahead and convert that to editable poly. I'm going to delete the top, and I'm going to delete the bottom. You know, there are a few different ways to do this. Yeah, it's going to be close. And it's not bad to use that as a method to check your work and just make sure you're going down the right path, basically. So at this point, all we have is the outline of the main part of the building there. I'm trying to think on the easiest method to get back to the numbers that I need. What I'm actually going to do for the next little bit here is I'm going to hide the ground plane. That is still centered in the object, so what I'm going to do is actually center this at 0, 0, 0, and I'll explain that in just a second. This is kind of what I was talking about with making sure that, or working with world pivots and local pivots and using that to get information faster. What I need to do is come off of that edge out 12 inches, go up, 6 inches, and then I can make my roof plane. I can make the roof planes first. There's a couple different ways to go about that. I think I'm going to use the edge modeling technique. So I'm going to come off the edge here, and you notice on the Y measurement, the roof itself was 20 meters from point to point. So, here I'll do it on the other side so it'll make a little bit more sense so it's not a negative number. What I'm going to do is hold shift, right shift, hopefully that shows up there. It's not showing that I'm holding it, but I'm currently holding it. Drag that out. Now I have a new polygon there. The other thing I want to do is make sure it's facing down. In which case it would be flip normals, that would be facing up, that would be facing down. You can also hit the flip button over here, it does the same thing. So it is currently facing down. The other thing I need to do is, so what I can do is go to 10 meters. That just moved over 12 inches, and what I want to do is actually verify that. So 10, 9.65 inches. Let's just see if that's correct. So let's do 10 minus this 9.695. Too many windows. 9.695. You can see that is exactly 12 inches apart. I hopefully that makes sense how I got to that point. With that polygon, moving that over 12 inches from here to here. I'd already made the box 12 inches, 24 inches less, but it's centered on 0, and that's why I moved it to 0, so I could get that information faster. I don't care what that number is, 9.695. I just know that if I move this over to 10 meters, kind of going back over it just a little bit. I know I skipped over that a little bit fast. I already know that the box is 24 inches less than the roof measurement. I centered the box on 0, 0, 0. I don't care what that 9.695 is, even though I just proved that it is 12 inches over. I know that half of 20 meters is 10, so that if I put this edge at 10, and I do the same thing over here, holding shift, dragging over, put this one at negative 10, I know that from, you know, that edge over there to this overhanging edge over here is now 20 meters. So hopefully that part makes sense. I'll end up doing the same thing here. It's going to be a little bit more difficult because it's not a nice round number. Also noticing that, you know, that edge will have to move out just a little bit. For right this second, I'm not going to worry about these ends so much. So all I did was move that over in the y-axis. It's still at the same height, so I've got my overhang. There'll be a lot of cleanup work that I have to do. Right, yep, that's what I'm talking about, using the so the fact that you put a box at 0, put that box at 0, 0, 0, and already know the dimension of the box itself. I know where 12 inches more than that on one side should be. That part was a little bit easier than doing it this way, because this one's 31.25 minus 24. It'll be half of 31.25. I'll worry about that in just a second, but yep, put those polys at known values, and so there are working pivots that you don't even see. So use the 0, 0, 0 to your advantage while you're doing this kind of stuff. And there are ways to do, I think you can isolate it, and I think it will recenter without moving it in the world. Isolate it, and then it'll move it to 0, 0, 0, and then, you know, unisolate it, and it'll put it back where it was automatically. I'm pretty sure that's the way that works, but I've never used it, so I'm not going to try to demonstrate that. And what I'm talking about is, I don't even know where it's at. Isolate selection. I think if you click that, and this is off center in the world, you click isolate, it'll create a temporary working scene with that centered, so you can do this kind of stuff. And then end isolate, it would put it back in the world, but maintain all the, you know, separate stuff. I think that's how that works. I haven't messed with it. I'm not going to do that on the stream. The next thing I need to know is we'll go 6 inches up. So we'll go plus, so I'm taking 6 inches up in meters plus the current height. So paste that in there. So I'm copying that. Holding shift, dragging up. Pasting that in there. I'll zoom in so you can see what I just did. So I went over 12 inches, up 6 inches. And the next thing I'm going to do is highlight the Z and Y axis, drag that over. And I know the Y axis is going to be 0. And the height, let's go to here. So in feet, I know the total height to the peak, to the ground, is going to be 30 feet, so it's an additional 10 feet above. And remember, it's that measurement right there down to the ground of the building is 30 feet. 30 feet, 9.144. So we'll go ahead and set that. There's your peak right there. Now it looks a little bit short in this method because there is no edge in the middle. Looks a little bit better if you do something like that. It's obviously not closed in either, so it's a little bit hard to see. Let's go ahead and go back. Now I don't need to find that information anymore, it's already in there, so I'm just copying the height of that edge right there. Just a second. Alright, sorry about that. So I've got the height right there, copied that over. And to drag down this way, set the height there of that edge. And I already have the Y measurement, which is -10. Now this is a good example of bridging. I want to try this here. Jason had tried this in his stream and it didn't work the way I thought it would. I'll turn angle snap off, turn snaps on, and snap to edge segment toggle. And let me zoom in a little bit here more. So I'm hitting the bridge button. Yeah, so that worked the way I expected it. Let me undo that. I think, let me try this, because the way he tried it was with both edges selected. Turn snaps off. Okay, so we have that. Hit bridge. I don't know. It worked like I thought it would there. That's strange. It didn't work in his. I'm not sure if the verts have to be unwelded. And what I mean by that is selecting verts and then hit break right here. Maybe that's what the difference is. I'm not sure why that it didn't work on his. But that gives me the overhang, the upright like I wanted it to be. Okay. I know might have something to do with the spline versus box modeling. Yeah, it could be. Could be. Like I say, I think if you use a spline, it may weld the verts automatically. Maybe that's what was going on there, and they needed to be broken before that would have worked. I don't know. I'm not sure. What I'm talking about, I know I'm kind of going off on a tangent there. When he did that, it was basically flipping the triangles on top of each other. And it was giving a very obvious, not good result, I guess, would be the way to say that. So far, I'm happy with the way that's working out. Now, here's another scenario where working with pivots is going to be interesting. A couple different ways you can do this. I need this overhang, and I don't have to do this right now. I can do it afterwards, but I'll go ahead and do it right now. We'll go back to inches, 6 inches. I think I still have that in there. Is it still in there? No, it's not either. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and clear the memory. Clear that. Paste that. Put that into memory. Yeah, it was doing some weird stuff on Jason's model. I don't know exactly what was going on there, but you got to pay attention to every step. Like I say, there's 100 different ways to do each one of those processes. So, you know, I made a critique of his stream talking about Jason's stream talking about how I'm not using freehand movements. This is where you get into trouble, doing this stuff right here and trying to, let me see if I can get this straight and not, don't do that. You don't necessarily have to do it with the precision that I'm doing it, but using known measurements, using known points in your scene to get the numbers that you need it to be is right. And just use the known measurements. So I know the height of this edge right here now. This is a little bit different than using, say, this right here, because it's, you know, that vert at this end and the vert at the other end are the same height. That's not the case here. Where it's drawing this pivot point right now, that's the number I'm going to use. So I'm going to grab the height of that right there minus the 6 inches. Now notice what happens when I paste this information into this edge right here. Watch this corner right here. Paste that in. It automatically lined up with the other one perfectly. I mean, that's darn close right there. I will end up having to snap that vert. It is overhanging just a little bit. You can kind of see right there, 2 separate verts. That will bug the crap out of me. So I'm going to go ahead and snap. And I'm going to snap to vert just to make sure. So is that exactly 6 inches? You can kind of see there in that example that there is nothing that's perfect. Even using this method, it's not 100% perfect. So it's close enough. I'm not freehanding anything. Those 2 verts are in the same space. Yeah. You know, it's taking an average of those 2 vertices too, which is not exactly the same. The other way to do that would be you could do each vert independently, snap that vert down there, and then take this here minus the 6 inches. Now the additional decimal points are also, you know, a factor there too. It's not taking it into consideration that, so that's where I'm okay with it. Is 3ds Max is only accepting 3 decimal points, so it's only going to take you know, a certain amount of precision. So this is a good example where creating a polygon, you know, I can do the exact same thing over here, and I can take this and I can drag the edge down. Oops, that snaps on. It always does that to me. Turn the snaps off, so drag down, figure out that same thing, do that same way. In this case, I've got all 4 vertices there, so what I'm going to do is go to polygon, go down to create, and then turn snaps, snap to vertex on. See how that little yellow crosshair pops up? So I'm going to click there, click the one below it, click that one, click that one, click that one. Now I've done, you know, I created that same shape on the other side without doing any more alignment too. They're automatically all snapped into place. So you have to know which tool to use. You have to know when to switch to the other tools and that kind of thing. Really dragging this out a little bit as far as length of the video and everything, but it's kind of why I wanted to do a stream more than anything. And I think it's important because I don't think I've done this on any of the other streams, showing why I'm using this tool over the other tool. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's which tool are you going to use to do that? There are multiple ways. I just showed you 2 different ways to do the same thing. The create polygon is a little bit quicker in that scenario. If you don't have that information, you can't do that if you don't have the other information there. So when I first did the first one there, where does that vert go? Well, we know it goes on 0, 0, 0, so I could create another way. And this is how I did the original model, was I clicked. Now, I clicked create. I created a vert back there. Notice it created it back there on the ground. That's just the way 3ds Max works, is it doesn't know where you're clicking in 3D space, so it has to assume that you're clicking on the ground. I can take that vert, I still got snaps on, turn that off. Take that vert and move that in 3D space and get it roughly up here. Yeah, I can set the as Jason's saying, he would have performed a clone, slid it over the spot needed. You would have had to mirror that or individually manipulate each one of the verts basically the same way you would create the polygon. So it's not wrong, but it also creates a little bit more steps involved. So you know, I can figure out where that needs to be. Yeah, just another way. Yeah, like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. This is the way I originally did this model, was drawing one vertex at a time and then moving that vert where I needed it to be, and then creating a polygon using those verts. Extremely time consuming. Alright, so the next thing I need to know is 31.25 divided by 2, 15.625. Yeah, I like the method with the create poly. You know, I'm going to say this 1,000 times during the stream, but it's just another tool. It's a flathead screwdriver, it's a Phillips screwdriver if you're mechanically inclined. It's just another tool in your toolbox. You got to know when to reach for it and use it on the appropriate fastener or whatever. I know I'm talking about a different topic, but hopefully that makes sense. You've got to practice each one of those procedures and know when to use it to get to the end result faster. More effectively, more efficiently, whatever you want to call it. You got to get the polygons where you need the polygons. That's what we're trying to work on. So I know that I will have to break the verts on this. There are a couple different ways to break verts, by the way. I can go around and click on each one of those, holding control, left clicking on each one of those verts to add to multiple selection. Then I can hit break. The faster way to do that is to select that underhang polygon right there and go to detach to element, and now that just broke all the verts on that without breaking any of the other verts. Yeah, create less work for yourself is what it boils down to. Yeah, I agree with that. It takes practice. You have to learn each one of those tools. You may need to build an entire model using the edge modeling before you understand when that's appropriate. You may need to create a vertex and then create a polygon out of every one of those vertices before you understand when that's appropriate to use. Nothing wrong with that. Learn every one of those processes. It'll make more sense. It'll come more naturally when you come into a complex situation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break this one or detach this one as well. Detach to an element. All I'm doing here is I want to, not sure if it'll let me. I need to break this one as well. I think yeah. I need to detach that one as well. Detach to element. Again, you can do, break the verts or detach to element. Either way, I believe it does exactly the same thing. Yeah, now I can select border. Before there was no edge there as far as the border is concerned. You see how I can't click over here on this end? It's because this polygon and this polygon are still welded at the seam, so it doesn't see that there's an edge there to select. But I broke this one free, so hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I'm not skipping over that too fast. I know I'm going over a lot of basics in this, but really more process than anything else here is what I want you to get from this, not how to build a specific object or whatever. Now the cool thing is I can hold control and select multiple borders, so that selects all those edges for me. I can switch over to edge and it still has all those edges selected. I can add that edge to it. I can add that edge to it. Now I have the ones that I need to move, and I'm noticing that the pivot is not going to allow me to do what I want it to do. I think the quick align tool would help here. This is one thing where I'm not exactly sure why it's doing this the way it's doing it. Also noticing that that's not going to give me the result that I wanted. So really didn't need to break that. I think the better way to do that would be to switch over to this view, still in edge view, drag select, and then hold Alt and deselect the ones I don't want to move over. So I don't want to move that one, don't want to move that one, don't want to move that one, don't want to move that one. So now I've got all the edges selected. I know it looks like the same selection on the video, but I have the edge of this polygon selected now. So hopefully that shows up. See how I can drag the entire thing, including the roof and the underhang, but the square part of the building didn't move. Now obviously that's way farther out than it needs to be. I'm just exaggerating for video's sake here. Dragging it out that far makes it a lot easier to select. So I'm just dragging, making sure I have all the end ones selected. I have the roof selected, so I'm going to Alt and drag select right up to that. Notice how I only have the end selected. Never would have figured what? Did I skip over something? There are a couple tools. I'm actually going to try something here. I'm going to align these on the x-axis, and it still didn't let, so they're not would have selected all the inverts and dragged. Yeah, you can do verts, yeah. I'll go back and touch on the reason why I didn't do that. Put it back where it was here. You know, the reason why I didn't do verts is if I drag select this, it has the upper corner of this. It has the upper corner of this selected and the upper corner of this selected, and I don't want that. I only want those edges, not the verts. It would be very difficult using vert selection to, especially being, you know, precise. Now, you can also, if you wanted to, you could take all of these polygons for the box and detach it to another object, which would make it a little bit easier to select verts that way. Again, 1,000 different ways to do it. Detaching it, then you would have to reattach it later, so doing it this way is a little bit easier. Just curious, now that I've got this dragged out, it's an interesting approach, yeah. You know, talking about multiple different ways to do it. Just curious if I did this, now that I've got those separated from these walls, so I'm not in danger of selecting these verts if I do that. Okay. So that's an interesting point there. Now that I've got those edges moved all the way out, there's no possible way I'm going to select. There's no possible way I'm going to select. Now keep in mind there are two verts right there. Well, it's welded. These two are still attached. Now if I hit break, so I moved it there. If I hit break, that's because there's a vert for this and a vert for this. So there are two verts there. There are essentially two verts there. the point I was trying to make just a second ago was I'll select these. If you notice down here in the type box, those edges, even though they are perfectly, I'd already broken them into elements, yeah. Even though they are perfectly aligned in the X direction, it's not giving me the type box because we're in edge mode. However, if I switch to vertex mode, they are perfectly aligned, so I can set that where I need to set it. So in this case it'd be the negative, that number. So I've got a 12-inch square overhang right there. And kind of see how we're getting into so I'll leave it right there, and then I'll switch back to the picture there. You see how we're kind of getting that overhang like we need, basically. Get some water here. Yes. In this case, using the verts ended up being the method. I used the edge technique to get those separated and pulled out away from the other ones, so I'm not accidentally selecting the verts that I don't need. If you know of a better way of selecting verts, or you know, I don't know how you would know, but if you knew which vertex you need out of the 3 that are clustered together, yeah, you don't get the XYZ for multiple edge selections. I think there's a limit of how many edges you select before the, let's just say, now that I'm saying that. So obviously you have one edge selected, it gives you the measurement. You add another one. As soon as you add a second edge, it no longer gives you the pivot tool manual entering mode there. Not using the right terms, but you get what I'm saying. As soon as you select multiple edges, you can't manually input the information because it doesn't know how to extrapolate that information. So use the edges to select it, get it moved away from the other verts, then switch over to verts, and then set your verts, because it can calculate averages for all the verts, but not for the edges, I guess would be the way to put that. That's actually something I just learned. I didn't even realize that. So that gives me the overhang that I need here. Obviously I need to, sorry, getting a phone call there. I need to box in or close in this information, or close in this end, or this gable end, or whatever you want to call it. I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and get the other side separated in the same method. So I'm going to do, knowing that I have to do that, there are a couple things that I can copy right away. So I can copy that height right there, which is the bottom of the center. So I'm just copying the height right there. So copy that. I'll do the shift drag method here, make sure snaps is off, bring that down. In this case, I'm not going to do anything as far as measuring and all that kind of stuff because it ended up not being exactly perfect. So what I'm going to do is actually just snap that vert right there, turn snaps back off, and just set the height of that one because I've already got the information from the other end. So again, you can see I'm switching between a bunch of different tools in my toolbox to accomplish all this stuff. Now I've got that information right there. So again, I'm going to switch to create polygon because I have the information now. And turn on vertex snap and just draw that shape. And I end up with the piece that I need there. don't have to do any adjusting. Cloning the other end, bringing it down to this end. It's, well, I mean, I haven't showed that, so let me show that. Show what Jason's talking about here, so I'll just go ahead and delete the two that I just made. Like I said, there's no wrong method here, so let's go ahead and show that. I believe when I do this, however, it's going to clone it to... No, I can clone it to an element. Okay. The other thing I need to do, I actually did not know that. When you drag select in Polygon, you can choose whether it's an object or a element. I assumed that it always took that cloned output and turned it into another object. I assumed that, but I guess not. So we'll go ahead and flip normals, or you can hit flip right there. Does the same thing. Make sure they're facing the other way. We can take... Okay, so it works the same way on polygon and edge. So I'm kind of curious if I put this on here. No, that's not right. This. Okay, so these two are separated. I was wondering if it was going to grab this edge and move it over, which is not a problem. You can kind of see how that creates additional work. Now I've got to fill in that gap there. I basically still have to do exactly what I did on the other end. I still have to separate out those edges. So I want this, this. This is already detached. I'm just curious if I just do it this way. So it did not mess up that corner. Yeah, so it kind of... So I'll explain what happened right there. The slant of the roof and this vertical part here are still welded at this seam right here. So if I grab this edge only, the other thing I'm noticing when I do that is if I select these two edges, notice that it still has this here because that seam is still welded. If I want to do it separately, now there's two different paths forward from that right there, and I'm going to show you both just so it's kind of clear. What I can do is I can go ahead and do that, allow it to move the vert, and just go up here and move those verts separately. Just like that, and then rinse and repeat, you know, on around. So I'll undo that. There are multiple ways to do it. I know I'm beating a dead horse saying that over and over again. But I can also detach that. Now when I move this edge, the roof did not move. So I know that this seam is also welded, so I'd end up having to do the entire thing. Now when you're getting this far into a model and you're working on little details like this, something that I've done in the past is select all verts and hit break. And what I just did was detached every single one of those faces. You can actually see when I did that there are additional verts now being drawn. Just another method. I'm not going to tell you which way is right because I don't think there is a right way. So when I move that edge, that's correct. It did not move anything on this one. And we'll go ahead and select that, rotate around. This one should already be detached. Yep. The problem you run into is, you know, that's more verts than what I started with. Depending on your conversion methods into a video game, assuming that's why you're doing this, if you're just doing it for a render, it really makes no difference. As I'm sitting here talking, I realized I haven't saved this in a while, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. Uh, 3ds Max likes to crash, just like any other program. So we'll go ahead and save that. It does create automatic backups, but it is best not to rely on that. The other method for doing what we're doing here is you could have used the mirror modifiers. Anytime that you're taking a break, stepping back and looking at your model, that's a good time to save. Anytime you step back and look at it and go, oh, that's a lot of progress, you need to remind yourself, that would be very bad, detrimental to my motivation if that disappeared. So save that and save yourself the headache. Like I said, it does create automatic backups, but it may be 20 steps behind where I was just at, and you may have to do those 20 steps over, and it gets frustrating. So save often. Pretty good program as far as memory leaks. You don't really have to worry about it running worse the longer it runs or anything like that. So I can tell that I'm not going to get this object done in this stream. It is taking a little bit longer just because I'm talking so much. And yeah, looks good. Power goes out. Rip. Yep, that's the way it goes. Been there, done that way too many times. So I'm not going to get this object done completely, but I think I'm covering enough of the basics of how to approach things and how to get the measurements and things like that. So I'm not going to end right away. I'm probably going to go for maybe another half hour or something like that. We'll see what we get done here. This is a lot of fun for me. I haven't been in 3ds Max for a while, so talking about how to close this gable end in is probably actually another good use of time here. So and there's a couple different ways to do this. I'm actually going to go back to a method, well, I'll talk about the couple different ways, and it's kind of a repeat. Top edge of the wall, yeah. I think I'm going to show two different ways where the original method that I learned would actually be an okay way to do it. I'll create a random vert out here, and what I'll do is I'll center that on the Y because I know the center of the gable is at 0. And then I will bring that up to where I can see it. So I can see it right there. What I want to do is bring that up to this here. Again, this is just one method. May not necessarily be the right method. So I just brought that out in the X measurement. And actually zoom to it. Zoom in. And kind of see where I'm going with that. So again, copying. Yeah, you can create verts. You can draw an entire the edge modeling, the polygon modeling. That's actually in addition to vertex modeling. Vertex modeling was the original way you created things. Back before they had all. This is the the very early beta versions of 3ds Max that I've seen. Vertex was the only methodology you had. Most of this information is for your benefit. So again, copying information. So I'm going to copy the X measurement of the wall, paste that there. Oops. So now I've got that vertex back there where I need it to be. So there's a couple of different things I can do. This is going to be a little bit difficult to do, but I'm going to go to Polygon, I like to make sure when I create a polygon I don't have anything else selected, so it's not like attaching this to what I'm getting ready to create and creating weird elements, overlapping elements. I always try to make sure I'm starting with nothing selected. So we're going to create, snap, vertex snap, right there, to there, to there, to there. That went ahead and created my triangle. Snaps. It gets you every time. That snaps on it separate. Tried to move it there. It just kind of jumped up. You see how certain pieces of that are attached and certain pieces aren't. So that gives me my end triangle there. So that was one method of doing it. I'll go ahead and delete that. See, this is why I'm not going to get this whole thing done on stream there. Because I'm showing multiple different ways of each, you know, switching between different tools, I guess. So the other way to get that measurement back there is I can simply shift drag off of here and put that edge back there. Now what did that do? It also gave me a vertex back there, the one I just created by hand. So again, multiple different ways to do the same thing. I can do the same thing over here. I think this probably is the better way to do this particular scenario. And zoom in pretty far here on that vertex. Just curious, make sure that's, yeah, that's pretty well aligned. Kind of got to watch that with the edge, dragging edges out like that. It may not necessarily work 100%. It also dragged it, you know, it's going to create a scenario in here that I'm not going to like, so I may end up changing that part. Yeah. So yeah, it is easier, but I think it's going to end up creating more work in this area right here, and this is getting a little bit hard to look at even for me. Let me try turning realistic on, see if that helps at all. Not really. Basically what I'm going to end up with, it's getting hard to look at. I know it has to be hard. I don't know if another color would help here. Let's try a different color maybe. No, not really. Yeah, you'd have to cut that polygon out, and what you're going to end up doing is boxing that off. And let's take a look at the way they actually do that. The way it really gets grainy when you zoom in, but you see how this comes down. It doesn't extend down to this point like it currently is in the model. It actually comes in line with this upright right here. It actually goes straight up. Yeah, it's the way you do it in real life. Yeah. I guess either way you do it, you're going to end up with that same weird part that you're going to have to change. So it does give me the vertex that's back there. It does give me that information a little bit faster, so I guess that does save a little bit of time doing it that way. So we'll go ahead and create that triangle. You know, we got that vertex up there now, so we'll go ahead and do that. So we'll create. So we go from the corner there to that, back to that. And I really don't like that red. I'm going to change to, let's try gray maybe. Nah, that's really hard to see. Maybe a brownish color. Nah, we'll go back to purple. That's fine. Shows the edges up very well, so I think we'll just leave it on purple here. You can kind of tell what's going on. You do end up with a slightly different angle here. I mean, that will have to be addressed. I mean, that is a valid point. You also have to detach this and actually bring them over to here. Or bring them over to the, whatever that measurement is right there. But right now you've got, let's see, what's the best way to do that? I guess the takeaway from all this is you're doing, I'm going to separate into elements so you can apply different colors. Yeah, you can do that. Separating them into different objects, you add the extra step of having to go back and click on the other object and then go back to get to copy your information. So that gets a little bit messy doing it that way. Really want that to follow the triangle more than anything else. I guess realizing, you know, a mistake that I may have made there was, I think the way it's actually made is, oh gosh, let me turn edge faces on. Maybe that's easier to see. Not really. I think that the way that it's actually made is, let me get into a position where this makes a little more sense. The corner of the box, I know it's impossible to see because it's back behind there. Pretty much my problem with having the different pieces in the separate object. Yeah, it adds a few extra mouse clicks there. It gets a little bit complicated to switch back and forth, but I think the you know, the area that I screwed up on was the height of that corner, the corner of the main box here, and the height of the top of the roof are actually the same height, and this edge is actually hanging down 6 inches below where the height of that would be. I've got snaps turned on. Stupid snaps. Even if you don't move the mouse, it still tries to snap stuff. That's what happened there. Was I clicked here and clicked over here and it snapped this edge over to that. So anyways, kind of screwed up there a little bit, but let's keep working. So I'm switching to vertex so I can rotate around right in here. You know, how would you fix this? So what I want to do is take that polygon. Now I've, you know, drag selected, and when you drag select off of an edge, that seam that where you dragged from, you cut the poly. Well, the problem that I'm having is this gap right here between, maybe it's not showing up very well, this edge and this edge. That gap should not be there. That's where I'm kind of saying I screwed up on the roof a little bit. I understand what you're saying. You would basically use a line off of this edge right here. You know, and thinking about it now, you may actually want the, which direction is that? The X. You may actually want that back over there, not extended out, and you may actually want a separate polygon sticking out here. Because what you could do, then you've got a small polygon instead of dragging the whole thing up inside there. You know, bring that up there. Just like that. Yeah, something like that, yeah. This is one thing that I have not figured out myself. And, you know, thinking about how real construction would accomplish this. Just kind of thinking out loud. In this scenario, I don't know the automatic way to do this. So I would end up having to use this here, and we're actually on the right side, I believe. Yes, we're on the right side. I don't know how to make that perfectly. I'm not sure what the word is. Grabbing those two verts. How to do this any other method than using the side view and snapping it, and I'll show exactly what I'm talking about. Turning the vertex off, turning to snap to edge. Actually, no, it didn't work. I mean, that's not precise. I don't know how you would do that. So that is one scenario where I actually don't know how to solve that with snaps and being super precise. Yeah, I honestly don't. I don't know how, and what I'm trying to say is, maybe I didn't speak while I was doing that, is how would you keep it snapped to that green line there? Here, let me make it bigger so you can see it. I need to keep those verts snapped to that edge to be perfectly in line with that face. I'm basically looking at the aliasing of the vertical line. I mean, it's that part of it is still kind of a guess. I guess I've got some learning to do too, obviously. But there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's what we're doing this for, is to learn how to do the stuff. Quick snap. Well, and you know, I can go back and I can turn snaps off before that messes something up. You know, I can go back and get the precision back. I can get those back in line and paste that information. It actually stayed number-wise exactly where it should, so that's probably the best you're going to do. I think what I could do to kind of get the information that I'm thinking I'm needing to get, well, yeah, and the other thing he's talking about at Quick Align is like using this here should be in the Y measurement. Like that just did it right there. That would work, and then obviously do the same thing there. But well, it gets them straight by average. I guess I can show that real quick. We'll do that in another. Let's see. We'll do it with a plane over here somewhere. We'll kind of exaggerate it a little bit. On a plane, I guess it doesn't really make any difference But I'll do editable poly, and I will do select all those verts on the move axis. If I hit, let's see, oops, is it the Y? Nah. What if I just do 2 of them? Nope, not sure what's doing that. So I've got 2 selected. In theory, if I hit X, I'm not sure why it's collapsing them like that. Unless the... See, do I need to be on local? Maybe. Here, let's turn angle snap on. Put that at like 70 degrees, something like that. Let's just do 2 and I hit X. Nah, not sure why it's doing that. So again, that's a tool that I have not used a whole lot, so I don't have an answer on that. I wonder if it has to be closer on the angle. So it was at 70, so if we go another 15, quick align was simply to straighten bent points between verts. That's not wrong, but the way that I understood it, maybe select world. Nope. The way I understood it, and the part that you had to be careful was, if you hit quick align, and I'm noticing that I have the gizmo constraint on. I wonder if it has anything to do with it. Nope. Straightening verts and UV map. Yes, it is, but what I'm trying to get you to understand, I know I'm going in circles there, is it will average between those 2 points. So 147.471, 152.366. It should move this one over half of that difference. So you would take 152.366 minus 147.471, subtract that, the smaller number from the bigger number, and then divide that by 2 and move this one over that much and move this one over that much, so it would average it. I hope that makes sense. Neither one of those two would end up in the same place, is what I'm trying to say. It's not going to move this one over that entire distance to match up with this one. It's not going to move this one over that much distance to match up with that. Obviously I'm getting messed up there, but hopefully that makes sense. Okay. That's the way I thought it worked. It's not working the way I thought it was going to. Back to this. One thing that you have to not do when you end up in a scenario like this is get frustrated and start over. Unless something is completely screwed up to the point where it's just not going to work, and no matter how many times you hit Control Z undo, it's just not working the way you want it to work. Find a path forward using all those tools. Yeah, and I have too. You know, I was still contemplating doing it. I'm like, oh great, I got to start over. Completely wasted this. But no, find a path forward as long as it's not completely screwed up. But this is not completely screwed up. Everything's still fine. At this point, I'm also going to save. That's the other thing I could have done, is reverted back to the previous save. But I mean, that's, find a path forward as long as you're, yeah, everything's fine. Everything is fine as I'm sitting here in the burning background. No, it's fine. There's another way to do this. So we can attach that to an object and affect pivot only. Center to that object. So now I've got that polygon as its own object. I'm going to turn snaps on, snap to vert only. Yeah. So I'm going to snap that over to that vert right there. So turn affect pivot off only, or affect pivot only off. English. Actually, no, I did that wrong. What I need to do is snap it to the top one. Always glance up before you start moving stuff and make sure your snaps are turned the way you want them to be turned. Okay, so turn pivot off, go back to object selection, and then I'm going to snap that to vert with the correct object selected. I'm going to snap it right there. Now what I've done is I've got the information that I need to be able to snap all of these verts back to this. So I've got a path forward. I can now drop this down over to here. I think that's the way forward. What I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to separate this polygon as well, just to see if that will do what I think it's going to do. So I'm on that object there, which is the underhang on the end here. It's going to get a little bit complicated, but I've got the vision in my head, so hopefully this works the way I think it's going to. So I've got that vertex. I'm going to snap it over there. Snap this one over there. That solves my underhang issue. Hopefully that makes sense. The next thing I need to do is get the height of this. I might be creating more of a mess than I'm fixing. I don't know. In this particular case, I can just detach to element. Bring that down to there. I've detached it as an element, so I don't have to worry about the other end. If I hadn't detached it to an element, it probably would have screwed the other end up as well. More than it already is, so that's kind of why I did that. So what I'm thinking is taking this, and for right this second, I'm actually going to delete that one. So I just deleted the end. I'm kind of glad this is in here. Kind of shows kind of the problem solving aspects of it. Maybe something doesn't work exactly like you thought it did. Maybe something isn't built the way you thought it was. And there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. Jason said he would have started over by now. I mean, this is what I'm curious about right here. Did this part work like I thought it would? The answer to that is actually yes. Yes, it did. It worked exactly like I thought it would. So there you go. We just learned a little bit about how some of this stuff is actually built. I'm also noticing that I did not move this polygon, so make sure this is detached. Sorry about that. Detached to element. And that's not what I needed. I need this measurement here. So we end up with a little bit of a weird, you know, inside area there. I realize this is getting kind of difficult to see. But I end up with the shape that I want. I will also mention that as far as modeling goes, now you can see where starting over, yeah, I know it's getting hard for me to even see it though, as far as like the colors and everything. I'll go ahead and bring this back over, it'll help a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and detach the side of the main building there. And then I'm going to go ahead and lower that down internally. What you want to avoid is ending up with hidden geometry. Oh jeez, went crazy on me. Which end were we working on? This one, yes. It's kind of why you use detaches object. Yeah, you're not wrong. Can certainly see why. It would make that, you could make the roof one color and the roof one color and the main building one color, and it gets a little bit easier to see. So now we're at the point where the geometry makes a lot more sense. So we would have to copy this information over to the other four corners, obviously. We ended up with the correct overhang, the correct box section. It works out a lot better. But it's good that that was in there. Good information to find in there. There's only one part of texture making that I wanted to cover in this stream. It's been about half an hour since I said I was gonna. Obviously, I need to close this back in, which I'll go ahead and do right now. So we can make that into 2 polygons, snap vertex mode. Let's see. Another thing I need to do real quick. Drag select all the objects, hammer, collapse, collapse selected, collapse that all back together. Usually when I hammer collapse like that, I convert it back to editable poly just to make sure no modifiers are left over, make sure nothing gets left behind. Yeah, this corner looks exactly like I would expect it to, so that worked out. You know, there's probably things that I could have done different as far as originally laying out that roof and it's weird, it wouldn't let me zoom out for some reason, but you know, I could have set this measurement here and brought this down and then brought down the 6 inches over here. So thinking about how I would have done it differently. Maybe not necessarily starting the entire scene over, but maybe removing the roof and reapplying the roof to the basic box wouldn't be a bad idea there, since you have to do all 4 corners that way. I'm not going to do that on the stream here. I end up being here the rest of the afternoon cleaning it up, but just to make it clear, you know, I would delete basically all of that off of all 4 corners and just start over on the roof section, I guess would be the easiest way to do it. Yeah, I mean, that's doing it that way. You could probably end up, you wouldn't need this piece here. I will say doing it this method with this type of drop down where the edge of this edge here and this edge here are at the exact same height. Make sure I didn't move that. This edge here, 6.096. This edge here is 6.096. It's a whole lot more precise, I guess is what I'm trying to say. You end up with that at 6.096 as well, so there is no guesswork. So that eliminates all your guesswork there. I guess it's probably why they build them that way, would be my guess. As far as real life construction. Looking at the picture now, it's kind of grainy, but is that corner and the edge of the roof at the same height? Yeah, it's pretty close. It's pretty close. I mean, And I may do more streaming like this. May end up just stopping and picking up this stream next Monday or something. We'll have to see how that goes, but I realize that there's not really many followers on this channel, and didn't really advertise and didn't really expect to do this, but just kind of came together. So if there's any interest, leave a message on Facebook, stuff like that. Let me know if this is something that you guys are interested in seeing. Maybe seeing me struggle and seeing how I get out of those situations. Maybe that's helpful. I don't know. But something that I did want to talk about was texture work. Obviously, I'm not going to get anywhere near where I thought I was going to get. A lot of these processes are split-second decisions where when you're not talking to a stream or when you're not talking to somebody else, it goes a little bit quicker than what I'm doing here. Texture work, if this building was a cinder block texture. And Jason, you know, how do you go from where you get stuck, or you get stuck and you get frustrated and you keep trying to do it the same way, is I'm trying to get everyone to see that there's multiple different ways, and to stop. If it's not working, stop. Go back to where you can move forward more efficiently using a different method. And honestly, the more I sit here and talk, the more I'm thinking, instead of doing all that stuff to every one of the corners, just delete the roof, leave the triangle, leave that and that and that, delete the rest of the roof, and start over on the roof would be the fastest way forward. I did kind of want to talk about texture work. I'm not going to get into as much of the texture work as I want. I've already been streaming for a couple hours, coming up on a couple hours here. This archive will go on YouTube, the SDS YouTube channel. Put that up there. I don't want that video to be super long, so there may be multiple parts to this. You know, this particular building, I believe, is either stucco or vinyl siding. I can't remember. Yeah, it's easy. You can sit here for 6 to 8 hours and not even realize it. I'm realizing it because I haven't been sitting this long for a while now, but I have to ease back into it before I can sit here this long. Let's just say this was a cinder block building. How would you get your texture set up, and how would you Google has really screwed things up for us as far as the image search, finding pictures and stuff like this that you actually want to use. Find you a texture that works for you. I'm not going to show the entire methodology. Something like this would probably be a good one. Yeah, that's pretty good there. No longer can you click and go directly to the image. Some cases you can view image and still get to it at the full resolution, so that's probably not a bad one to use right there. This is actually probably a really good texture to use for maybe a cinder block wall. Looks like the repetition is pretty well spaced and even, and you know, you may end up, I have in the past, if I like this particular cinder block, I have actually taken and copied it into Photoshop all the way to the extent of copying or cropping out one block. And you notice how I did that. I've got, oops, transform selection is what I want. This transform selection, there you go. Cutting out a single block, just like that, and then edit, define pattern, just like that. If you're doing offsets on the brick, oh, here, I'll make a bigger one. I don't know if I've ever showed this before, but we like this. New layer. That's Monster Energy Green, by the way. I've got a lot of block patterns and stuff in here. Now notice doing it that way, there's no offset, there's no subway tile or Lego brick offset. Patterns usually always looks better if you do 25, 50, or 75%, you know, quarter percentages, I guess. To get that offset, you would have to take the original pattern and you would have to get some of that into it, just like that, and define that as a pattern. You may have to do, you know, as much as something like that. That would probably be it right there. Define that as a pattern, and that will give you a repeating pattern. If your texture that you've gotten off Google isn't the correct repetition, or it's cut off in certain areas and it doesn't look right if you define this as a pattern kind of thing. So that's how I would get textures made. I think I'm actually going to save that for another stream. I'll quickly glance over it. Let's see. Yeah, it's Jason saying he would have used the image that I don't know if you repeat that as a pattern if it's going to look seamless, so that's kind of why. You may not always get that lucky to find exactly what you want, so in that case, yes, you could probably use what I just found, but if you don't find exactly what you need and part of it looks like it would be usable, that was kind of how to use something that maybe don't necessarily work 100% like you want it to. How do you make it work? How do you make your own pattern, I guess, would be. I'll go over that in a little bit more detail on future streams, I guess, as far as how that works. By the way, I'm talking myself into more future streams, so yeah. So how would you size that on here? If this was a cinder block, this particular one is not a cinder block, so cinder block construction. Well, it may be cinder block, it may be stucco over top of cinder block, but how would you, if you were using a cinder block pattern, how would you get that set up? Cinder blocks are 8 by 8 by 16 inches. Again, general construction knowledge. So we know it's that by that. If you're better with math, you could probably do this a whole lot faster than what I'm doing, but I have to do this, so that's a cinder block in comparison to the building. Again, working with pivots, snap to vertex, zoom in, put it on that back corner right there. Snap to vertex again. So I've just snapped that back to that corner. Just for quickly doing this. I think I'd originally wanted to do it in vinyl siding, but the closer I look at that, I don't think it is vinyl siding. I think it is stucco over cinder block. I'd have to find a much better image for that. That's fine. There's original texture. So there's a couple different ways you could do that. We'll do this using the tiling in Max just for quickness here. And we'll find out real quickly if that's going to work or not. We'll apply a different texture, so we'll go to standard. Doing this super quick. This is not the point in the model that you would do this, by the way. You would want your modeling to be completely done by this point, but we'll apply the texture. And it's kind of funny, it actually. Honestly, I think that bitmap would work. I don't see any visible seams in the pattern. Maybe right here. It's close enough for what we're doing. If you're going to pre-render your shadows, if the game that you're working in does not have a full-time rendering shadow capability or shadow rendering capability, I said that backwards. If it doesn't have the ability to draw shadows in real time, and you have to pre-render your shadows, what you're going to want to do is convert your object to editable poly. You're going to want to unwrap the object. And before I do that, I'm going to convert that to editable poly. I'm going to clone it because I don't want to screw up the mapping for the way I'm actually going to show you here. It looks done, print it, yep, pretty much. We'll make a copy. And we will hide the first one. So we'll work on the second one. So we'll add the modifier to the second one. So I made a clone. So anything I change on here, I can just delete the object and go back to the way it was before. Open the editor. Bring the editor over so you can see it. Apply the cinder block texture. Zoom way out. Select all. And a couple other things I want to do. If you're going to pre-render your shadows, I want to be in polygon mode, select all the polygons, and I want to go to flatten map. What that does is it breaks every single face polygon down onto a singular texture, and if we look at the model, it's going to look crazy stupid because that's not the way we would map this particular object. It's not the way we would texture this object, I should say. But if you're going to pre-render the shadows, this is the way you have to do it. Your texture would be much larger, and you would do your texture repetition in your paint program, not in 3ds Max. Hopefully that makes sense. Did I skip over that too much, or does that make sense? Hopefully. If you're going to pre-render the shadows, you're going to flatten map or flatten out the entire object onto a singular texture where every face has its own part of a singular texture with no repetition in 3ds Max. For this demonstration, I'm going to show you how to do just applying the texture and sizing the texture correctly. There are other ways to go from what I'm doing when I back up here to this flatten mapping. I haven't done it, but I know there's ways to render out each face from 3ds Max, spit it out, and then apply it to a texture, and then pull it back into Max, and then reflatten map it. Hopefully I'm making sense there at all. I don't know. I might be rambling too much. This is the way you would map this object. Now you can take each one of those elements and make sure it's facing the right direction and turn it and rearrange all this stuff and however you want to do it. You don't have to accept the way that it's clustered this onto this texture. You can recluster it or however you want to word that. But hopefully that part makes sense. what I was attempting to show, I'll be honest with you, I'll keep it on this one. It's fine. This is something that you would have to do anyways, so I'm just going to leave it exactly like this. I've got this face selected, I've got the center block sitting there, I'm going to planar map that. And I'm going to reopen the editor, shrink that down just a little bit. And I'm going to hide or display only selected faces there. The other thing I'm going to do is go to Options, Preferences. I'm going to turn the tiles up to max, brightness up, tile bitmap. So now what I'm going to do is I've got one cinder block down. It might have to use multiple textures or even use a certain area of one big texture. Yeah, it comes down to texture layout. This is how I had done it in the past, and again, you cannot render shadows on top of this without going through some extra steps that I'll talk about in a minute. So I know that that bottom corner, this corner down here, is the one that's behind that brick, and I'm going to zoom into the brick just a little bit more. Actually, I'm going to keep it out right here until we get situated there, but notice when I drag this out, that texture gets a lot closer to the correct size. So we're pretty close on the height. Also, what I can do is I can hit F2 on the keyboard, turn that selection off so we can see the texture a little bit better. I've still got it selected, but I can hit F2 and turn that red selection face off. So I can go ahead and set the texture scaling. Yeah, F2 to turn, just turns the visual indication in your perspective or orthographic view on or off. So there it's on, there it's off. In this particular case, you would want it off so you can see a little bit better. Other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate this way a little bit. So I've got the height set exactly where I want it. And I'm going by the block, not the... I mean, this is the level of detail that you can get into. I'm going by the block, not the mortar in between the blocks. So I go back to that object, back to that polygon, still selected. And make sure the editor's open here. Alright, so I can hold shift and I can drag that over. You can see it setting up my scale right there. I can zoom into this corner and get a little more precise so you can actually see what's going on there. There, and then let's bring that up just a little bit. I just barely want to be able to see that gray in that corner. Right about there. Now, having said that, you're not going to want to end up with partial bricks over here. So those bricks are literally 8 by 8. Yeah, it's a similar process. It's what Jason used in his, I guess. You can do this with vinyl siding. Most vinyl sidings are either 4 inches or 6 inches wide, I believe. So you can set up a plane or a box or whatever to get your scaling correct. Now, this is something I'll have to do some research on, and this is what I was talking about earlier, is now that I've done that and got that the way I want it to be, there is a method in the UV editor, and I believe it's under Tools, Render the Template. I think it's under Render Template. There might be another tool in here to do this. I am fairly certain that I can take what I just assigned to that face, render it out, even though it's repeating in here, render it out to a texture based on the scale of another texture using the flatten mapping. I hope that makes sense. I take what I just assigned in 3ds Max, export it out to a rendered face. You know, you could, the cheaty way to do it, I guess, would be to actually go to the right side and actually F10 render that face and just literally use it. I do know it works. I know that's how a lot of textures are actually made, but I have not done it myself. Like I said, the cheaty way to do it would be to actually just render it. You can turn edge faces off and just screenshot it or whatever, but I know that it works. I know there is a way to get that information precisely out of it. I kind of skipped over, got distracted there, but what I was saying was you would not want partial blocks to be set up over here, so what you would end up doing is typically you would also not want partial blocks up here at the top. So in this particular case, what I would do is just scale that to where, you know, a solid block is. Scale that over to a solid block. The other thing that you would end up doing now, how does that end up working over here? Pixel width, I mean, it's not that far off, so it's kind of a testament to, did you size your building correctly? Because you're making a model of a real building, and if that's how the real building is made, then it's going to end up with solid blocks. You know, I'll kind of go over just a little bit. Planar map this one as well. You can kind of see where so we'll filter that. We'll go ahead and move him over here. So we'll select these two. Once you get your, yeah, pretty darn close. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about pixels. I mean, how precise is a pixel? I mean, you don't build houses with pixels, so. Something else I'll talk about is using polygon selection over vert selection. When you're selecting verts, in this particular case I would want to use verts because when I zoom in to this much of a, yeah, horseshoes and hand grenades, yeah. You know, I can actually zoom in to the extent of my computer starting to chug along, which it's doing right now, so that's as close as you need to get that. The other thing is this would be offset. It would not be in the exact same place. Let me leave that there just so I can demonstrate. So we know this would end up being almost the same height or slightly. I guess you would have to rotate this around here. 270, yeah. You would ideally want to bring this out so you can see it a little bit better, but I was thinking you wouldn't have to have that block over on this face, but to get the horizontal scaling correct, you would. And it doesn't have to be right on smack on the corner, so what I can do is just bring it out just a little bit, rotate around here. Hopefully all this is making sense. If you're doing just a render, you don't need to worry about texture baking and all that kind of stuff, so this is how you would do it, just for a render. Keeping in mind this edge off screen needs to be either on one of the two seams there, so that is probably where it will end up, because if I go look over here, I want that to be probably right there, to be honest with you. I'll look down here. Yeah, that's where you'd want that to be. Now, if I move this over, go back over to this corner here, you will see, I think I need to adjust the height as well on this. Before I forget, let me, oops, zoom in a little bit. Sorry, you can't see that, it's off screen. Sorry about that phone call. Turn off everything but the house phone. Of course, the house phone rings. Alright, so lining up the vertical here, I'm holding shift and just dragging that up. I'm getting that as closely aligned as I can there. Now when I zoom out, you'll see the obvious mistake here. When you have cinder blocks that wrap around, you would not end up with two half blocks right next to each other. This would be the end of this block over here. So what I have to do to fix that is actually, let me hide this so we can see a little better. Again, I apologize for the phone going off there, but what you would actually end up with is half blocks here with full blocks over here, half blocks over here with full blocks over there. So you can see that kind of precision that you get. You would not end up with mortar in between because it would be the same block. So you can see when you zoom that out, that looks natural. That look, yeah, it was a solicitor, it was a survey, political survey. Gotta love that. But you can see you end up with, that's how that building would be built. On that corner, that's how that would be built, is you would have a full block with another block halfway over it, and you would see the end of that block on the end of this wall. And that's kind of what you got to pay attention to. So like I say, there are ways to render out each one of those faces with the mapping that you currently have, and then you can just go in Photoshop and arrange those, and then you would basically basically just relay out or repack, I guess is what they call it, on if I turn off the polygons. Take this information, render it out to its own texture, paint it in another texture, or apply it in its own, bigger texture, or however you want to do that, and then repack. By packing, I mean lay out all those faces in its defined texture area without repetition outside of that box. Hopefully that makes sense. I know I'm dragging that out and rambling a bunch, but The other way to do it is just to make a single texture of repeating blocks, flatten map all these faces, and then set one of them. It gets a little bit complicated when you do that. So I've done it before on a basic square object. It's not bad. Or square building. On something with this many different sides and angles and little jut outs and stuff like that, it would get really complicated really quick. To do it the way using Photoshop, painting a repeating pattern on a 2048 by 2048. I've done it that way for years, but I'm telling you that it gets a little complicated because I don't know what the height of this is compared to this. I don't know what the height of that is compared to that. Yeah, so it can get complicated doing that way. The better method would be doing what I just showed here. Setting up your concrete blocks. I've never explored that method, so I don't know. You would not be able to use this method if you were going to pre-render shadows, because you would end up with shadows. Pre-rendered shadows cannot use repetition. Pre-rendered shadows have to be rendered inside of that dark blue box, whatever size it is. Hopefully that makes sense. Like I say, pre-rendered shadows, if you're going to do pre-rendered shadows, or shadows of any kind, to be honest with you, specific information. Well, not necessarily. You know, you're saying that there would have to be one big giant texture. Remember, you can change in Photoshop, you can change the scale of the repetition. So you can make it a 2048 with a 25% brick pattern. Change the scale of the brick. Brick doesn't have to stay that size, is what I'm trying to say. That's the other method, and the other method is what you would use if you were using pre-rendered shadows. Different texture information for every face. You cannot do it the way I just did it. You know, the method I just did works fine for 3ds Max, for doing renders in 3ds Max. Like you said, looks good, ship it. But that does not work for game files. Unfortunately, my voice is leaving me, so I'm going to have to end the stream here. Definitely not used to this. I haven't done a stream in quite a while, so I'd like to definitely get back into this some. I really enjoy this, sharing this information and different aspects of it. How to get, you know, as much experience as I have, I still get into trouble. So it's how do you get yourself out of the trouble. And I may not touch this until the next stream. I may actually just show how I would delete the roof and actually get back into it and get that part sorted out. Yeah, I think touched on a lot of basics here. Gone over a lot of basics. I know a lot of it's review, and if you're more experienced than me, then this is probably not the stream for you, not the video to watch, but you know, I know how painful it is watching somebody with less experience. You end up gritting your teeth a lot, but I started with the same experience as everybody else, so where I'm at now is in the middle of the road. I got a long ways to go too, so you know, I've watched a lot of people on YouTube that have struggled with stuff, and you know, Jason said watching him struggle. No, not just you. definitely not just you. I've watched a lot of people struggle with it. As you can see, I still struggle with some of it. So, absolutely beating a dead horse when I'm saying it, but figuring out which tool you need to use in which scenario and seeing that there are multiple ways to do it. That's all there is to it. So, hopefully you got a little bit of useful information out of this. I had a lot of fun doing this. Let me know on Facebook if you catch the replay, or I'll try to get this up on YouTube if possible, on the SDS YouTube page. Let me know in the comments there if you like this, if it was helpful, if you want to see more like this, you don't want to see more like this. Just let me know either way. So with that, I'm going to end the stream here. Thank you to Jason J-Rock for joining me here. And definitely appreciate you watching. And with that, I'll end the stream. Thanks for watching.